Hello, everyone. My name is Caitlin Dosler. I am the Virtual Fence Program Manager with the University of Missouri Center for Regenerative Agriculture. And I'd just like to take a moment to welcome you all to our third episode of Virtual Fence Foundation. Today, you guys are going to get to hear a really great presentation from both Matthew Jenkins of the Missouri Fertilizer Control Board and Christine Mushrush of Mushrush Ranches out of Kansas. Matthew's going to talk about different grazing strategies using virtual fence on perennial pastures and how Missouri producers could implement it into their operations. And then Christine is going to give us some great firsthand knowledge as her family's already implemented the technology on their operations. So we're going to get to see some really cool photos and hear from her on their experience with it. I'm going to introduce Matthew here and we're going to get ourselves rolling. It's his job to help producers and retailers implement best fertilizer management practices. He particularly enjoys working on pasture and hayland, which is reflected by his choice in education. In 2022, he graduated from the University of Missouri with a bachelor's in plant science and a minor in animal science. And then he went on to receive his master's degree in agronomy from the University of Nebraska at Lincoln, where he looked at annual forages to fill gaps in cool season perennial pastures. So he's going to enlighten us with all of his grazing knowledge today, and we're excited to hear from him. So take it away, Matthew.
Awesome. Thank you, Caitlin. Today we're going to start with talking about seasonal forage distribution. I'm guessing a lot of you know a lot about this. And then we're going to follow that with some grazing management. But ultimately, these 2 points are to kind of lead up to talking about harvest efficiency. Oftentimes we use the word utilization, but the two are not the same. And then I'm going to go through some potential uses of virtual fence. And like I say, these are just a couple. The It's kind of limitless, the uses that you can use virtual fence for. I'm gonna switch over to Caitlin. She's gonna share a few cost share opportunities with you, and that's some really exciting news that we have. And then you're gonna hear from our keynote speaker, Christine Musrush. So that's gonna be really fun. You're gonna then hear some information about how they practically use it on their farm. And then we're gonna save questions till the end. If you know anything about seasonal forage distribution, and you're in Missouri or east of here, and I think Christine probably has some fescue too, but we predominantly have cool season grasses in the area. And I'm sure you've seen this slide. Cool season grasses grow a large quantity in the spring and then again in the fall. And we're left with some gaps in forage production, right? So in my mind, we kind of have three key things that we can do to combat this, right? So we can either traditionally feed hay during those gaps, we can stockpile the forage, and that goes for summer and winter. Stockpile the forage to be fed at those times, or we can fill that with a native warm season grass or warm season plants in general. But oftentimes we talk about warm season native forages. So you can see how sequentially cool season grasses, growing in the spring. And then if you can move them onto warm season grasses, it makes a lot of sense sequentially. And then you can move them back to cool season grasses. So, right, that's the maybe traditional view of doing the sequential grazing. And to show you they are both of high quality. This slide has kind of two main points. There's a lot of columns here, but just focus on TDN or in vitro digestibility. They're both proxies of energy. And then, you know, cool season grasses are both high quality and warm season grasses are high quality. It just depends how you manage them, right? As long as they're vegetative, they can both be of high energy and high protein. And I want to point out switchgrass here because that's an interesting one. We do see that in the field that it's a little bit lower in protein, but that kind of is offset by pretty high productivity. So that's something cool to think about. But I wanted to tie it into this slide because we think about, cool seasons followed by warm seasons, followed by cool seasons in our neck of the woods. But really, a novel approach to this is how can we use virtual fence to graze both as we get into June, July, how can we graze lower quality cool seasons and higher quality warm seasons and get even more productivity on the land? Um, and right, using virtual fence, probably one of the main objectives to it to make money is to use it for a rotational grazing system. So last month, Shelby and Thomas talked a little bit about rotational grazing and strip grazing on annuals. But you can use it to increase the land productivity because you decrease or you affect two things. Intake, you affect, how much they eat of the plant and not waste. And also you affect what quality goes into that animal. I want to talk a little bit about another key factor of using virtual fence on perennial plants on perennial pastures. And this slide is from Greg Halich out of the University of Kentucky. I think he's an economist out there, but this was a re-recorded webinar. And but with this slide, he shows that, as you go from less frequent to more frequent paddock moves, the cost of your labor goes up. Additionally, the longer it takes, so as you increase the time it takes you to rotate, the cost goes up. So those are two key factors that we are pretty well eliminating or drastically reducing using virtual fence. And I want to talk about all those things to lead up to the harvest efficiency terms. So if you're in Missouri and you've had a grazing stick or you've been to a Missouri grazing school, you've been taught to use utilization, right? But harvest efficiency and utilization may be used very similarly, but they are not the exact same thing. So utilization, say, you go measure, you have 1,000 pounds of forage out there, you want to utilize half of it, so 500 pounds. Well, technically, not necessarily all of that is ingested by the animal, right? So harvest efficiency is the actual term for the ingested amount of forage or, the amount of forage that's eaten by the animal. But then you have a factor of waste, right? So the importance of rotational grazing is we are trying to reduce the waste and increase the harvest efficiency the same utilization rate. So we want to utilize 50% and waste 0% and that have most of that go into the animal, right? So that's really our goal. And with virtual fence, I think we're opening up a huge opportunity to maximize our harvest efficiency because we can allocate a daily quantity of forage to those animals. So if you have a herd, that eats 1,000 pounds of forage a day, you can allocate the exact amount of acreage using virtual fence. And I think that's an awesome opportunity that we didn't have with, hard fence or polywire fence. Just going through the math a little bit, we oftentimes talk about continuous grazing, but really, I don't think that continuous grazing happens that much anymore. A more realistic thing that goes on, especially here in Missouri, is that maybe we have a simple rotation. So maybe you have, two, three, four, five separated pastures that you move your livestock onto and our or our utilization or harvest efficiency called use efficiency in this calculation from Oklahoma State. For continuous, it's about 25% is ingested. For a simple rotation, so leaving them in there for a month or two, we increase our utilization a little or our harvest efficiency a little bit. But really, like I was saying with virtual fence, if we have the opportunity to increase the harvest efficiency to that full 50%, well, we have the opportunity to increase our stocking rate and carrying capacity by either a third or double, right? So if we go from 25% to 50%, that's double. 35 to 50% is about a third, something like that. So we have the opportunity to increase our carrying capacity, and that is how many cows we get on our acres. Oftentimes, if I'm visiting a rotational grazing system, I think the most common problem that I see with them is actually rotational overgrazing. So just because you're rotating doesn't necessarily mean that you're not overgrazing. And I want to go through how that happens because overutilizing and overgrazing are often looked at as the same thing, but they're not necessarily the same thing. So the y-axis here shows relative change in forage mass. Now, the zero would represent if you didn't graze it, how much forage mass you would have. And then on this graph, I mean, on the x-axis on this one, it shows defoliation intensity. So act as if it's utilization or harvest efficiency, how much of it you graze. So you can see that the line is actually pretty flat on this curve, indicating that it doesn't really matter how intensely you graze. So if you take the forage down pretty close, 2, 3 inches, it really doesn't affect forage production that much. But what does affect forage production a lot is the time between defoliations. Also, you might think of it as your rest period or your recovery period. So we see down in the 10 to 20 day frame, we can actually reduce our annual forage production by about half if we're not careful. So if we graze too often, so if we get off a paddock and come back to it 10 or 20 days later over and over again, we can actually reduce the forage quite a bit. But if we wait till that, 30 to 60, 40 to 60, especially time frame, we can actually grow as much forage as if we didn't graze it. Or close, there's a lot of factors, but that's something to consider in terms of overgrazing. Just because you accidentally graze it down to the nub once, it's okay because you can let it rest for a while and it'll be just fine. So why wouldn't you want to just graze it intensely the whole time? So this is a Mott curve. This was done by some research back in the 60s and 70s. So there's kind of two main points with this graph. As you increase your grazing pressure, what happens to gain per unit area? So you increase it to a certain point, and that is like pounds of gain that you get per acre. So if you have, 3 calves per acre and they gain 2 pounds a day, that's 6 pounds per acre, and so on and so forth. And as you increase grazing pressure as well, your gain per unit animal, so individual animal performance goes down to a certain point. And really, the intersection of these two is what's our optimum range between undergrazing and overgrazing, because it's kind of hard to figure that out. And what I think virtual fence is going to be especially awesome for is figuring out those optimum ranges on our farms, especially if we're going to be able to perfectly allocate the right amount of forage every day. So that's something to keep in mind. That's really cool with virtual fence. Another thing I think about, so Shelby and I rent this farm for our sheep. It was previously severely overgrazed for about 30 years. So we've got a lot of deep ditches and gullies. But something cool that I think about is that we're not constrained to paddock size and shape anymore. So with hard fence, we had our fixed system, maybe, a couple lines going across, up and down, and you can only do so much with the polywire, right? But with this, early spring grazing, you've got less forage, so you're going to have to make a larger area. And that's cool because we can change that as it goes later in the summer. And on this slide, I say it makes unrealistic designs become realistic because really, realistically, this would be a really tough design through a whole summer to do with polywire. And with virtual fence, I think it becomes more realistic, especially as we try to figure out how to allocate the right amount of forage every day for those animals. And I just have the waters here, so if you have two main water sources. You can put some above ground lines and get water to them. Now, your labor for water might go up. Maybe you can figure something out. That's just some things that I thought of right offhand. It gives you the ability to fence livestock out of ditches, which, like I said, this one was continuously grazed for probably 30 years. There's a ton of gully erosion. But now, if you were to switch to virtual fence, you could really keep livestock out of those ditches, but also graze right up to them. So you have that ability. Something we often think about too, and I'm sure you all have seen this on your all's farms, if you have a shade tree that they like to gather around, it gets pretty well destroyed underneath and pugged. And we have the ability with virtual fence to move where our shade trees are at. So I just, as an example, hop back and forth here, so that you rotate where they get access to shade from. One of the coolest things, like I was talking about with the ditches, is to exclude problem areas. One thing that, kind of drives me nuts that I've seen, you gotta, if you're doing other cost share programs, sometimes you have to fence out ponds, right? Well, with virtual fence, I think you're going to have the opportunity to graze right up against the pond while not allowing the livestock in the pond. So that's another cool thing, or out of other problem areas, because the question was asked a couple videos ago, can you make a paddock within a paddock? And I think the answer is yes. So, and that's some practical ways to use that. When we were talking about warm season and cool seasons, I was talking about diet quality, how you can kind of manage the higher quality, let's say you're in June, the higher quality warm season grass, and then the lower quality cool season grass. You can give the animals access to both. So in this example, and this is truly what's in the areas, all of these represent like a high productivity, low productivity. There's a lot of Korean lespedeza here, some red clover. But if say we're in summer, the tall fescue is lower quality, but we have some legume over here, we can allow access to both areas to give them a balanced diet, right? So depending on what your goals are. But I think that would increase the use efficiency of the land, right? Or the harvest efficiency. So with that, I'm gonna let Caitlin switch over.
Yeah, just real quick, as always, when we're talking about virtual fence with producers, the most common question that I usually get asked is about cost share programs because as it is with a lot of ag technology, it's a big investment for producers. And so it's really something we want to encourage producers to really kind of break open their books and take a really deep dive into like, okay, is this going to actually lower labor costs on my operation? Is it actually going to increase profits on my operation? Kind of all of those different things. And so I always want to bring up cost share programs. So to kind of start with, these groups do not have like direct cost share programs to virtual fence at this time, to my knowledge. They're just always good groups that I recommend to producers start having conversations with and reaching out to about potentially partner with to maybe get virtual fence technology on your operation or partnering up for a research project like I know the Mushrush Ranch did with the Nature Conservancy and different things like that. So it's just always good to talk to those different groups around you about what potential opportunities could come in the future. The three big ones I wanted to highlight, these ones are specific to virtual fence. So Trust in Food is one producers can start looking up. And I believe that application is closed for this year, but we can look into it for 2026. And it's the same way with the Property and Environmental Research Center. That application again is closed for this year, but it's something for producers to look at for next year because companies and different groups are really starting to see the value of virtual fence and they really want to help producers get it out there on the landscape. But the one I'm most excited to talk about with you guys today is Missouri NRCS is officially offering a virtual fence equip program. So all of my Missouri producers go out, visit your NRCS offices, and start asking questions. And so the information that I've received thus far um, is they don't have any payment schedules from the national office at this point, the state office of Missouri NRCS. So what that means is they don't have the exact cost share rates for what the program will look like for fiscal year 2026 at this time. They're hoping to receive them soon. But what I'm doing here today is I'm encouraging producers that are interested in this program. It's technically open right now, so you should be able to go walk into your local NRCS office, tell them you're interested in the virtual fence initiative or the virtual fence equip program, and they should be able to start helping you fill out all the necessary paperwork to get your name in the potential pool of applicants. And this is a great option for first-time farmers. I know that's something that the equip program really likes to highlight. And they also wanted me to encourage the fact, even if you have a regenerative grazing plan already going on your property and you're already doing rotational grazing, that doesn't take you out of the running to potentially get to implement this technology either. So, no matter the size of your operation, how versatile you are in rotational or regenerative grazing or not, I encourage all Missouri producers looking for a cost share option to go out and talk to their local offices. And the sign up deadline for the first round of money is October 3rd. So we kind of got a quick turnaround time here. So use the month of September wisely. I know it's a crazy time of year for folks, but go into the offices and you'll have to have your applications to the field offices and all like necessary additional info. I'm not quite sure what all that recommends, but your NRCS offices should be able to tell you, or folks can feel free to get a hold of me and I will help direct them as needed. But happy to take any questions on that at the end as well. But I think you can switch it over, Matthew. And yeah, now we get to talk to Christine. So, Christine, take it away. We're all excited to hear about Mushrush.
Thank you for having me today. I am by no means an expert, but I am happy to share what we have learned through our virtual fence journey. A little bit about us. We are a three generation right now, run ranch. We have Daniel's parents, so I married into the Mushrush family, and we have his parents. There's Daniel and I with our four kids, and then Chris and Katie Joe are kind of on the other side there as well. So one of his brothers. There were six Mushrush kids, so we've got Daniel and one other brother currently back on the ranch, plus our kids. We are predominantly a Red Angus seed stock producer. So we run around 900 registered cows split between fall and spring calving. And then we also run 400 to 500 commercial heifers that we buy back from customers, and we breed them and develop them in a like commercial bred heifer program. So lots of different moving parts, lots of things always going on, but it's fun to. We do have a guy full time now, started in January. That's helped, but before that we were 100% just family labor, which can be good and bad. So that's a little bit about us. I'll keep that brief, but why virtual fence? We got into the virtual fence, I think 4 years ago now, as a collaboration with the Nature Conservancy and K-State Research and Extension. So one of our property lines borders the Tallgrass Prairie National Park. That's right off of our neighbors to the east. And so it started as a way that they were trying to do research on bird habitats and things like that of how do birds and habitats interact with other grazers like cattle or bison or things of that sort. So in exchange for we opened it up. They can do research on our land because obviously birds don't stop at a fence line. And in exchange, we were able to rent that grass to the east. So it's actually been a very, very good relationship. We've been able to work with some great people with Nature Conservancy and TNC as well. I probably should put that on there. But that's how it all started, because with their research, they wanted to be able to keep cattle out of certain zones to measure like that bird habitats. We've also have some K-State's also doing water stream quality. We've excluded certain parts of a stream to see if, different things interact. So that's where it all started with us in doing the virtual fence. We actually started with a different company than that we're using now, But that's where just the idea of even looking at virtual fence for us came from. Um, Once we partnered with them and we got, our first set of colors on, it's been a lot of learning, but then we started seeing like, oh, there's going to be way more potential than just, keeping cattle out of certain zones. Like we can increase grass utilization, and with that, possibly increase stocking rates. And I probably should have put an asterisk on increased stocking rates because yes, you can do that, but you will always be limited by your water. We rely on springs and ponds, and just because, you can increase your stocking rate, maybe do 150 head in a certain place, if you get a dry summer or if that water source doesn't hold up, you could have all the grass in the world, but if you don't have that water, you're going to be limited. So I kind of always say increase stocking rate with a little bit of an asterisk because you don't want to grow and outpace some of your other resources there. And then one that people, everybody asks sometimes, how much have you been able to, have you been able to put a dollar figure on what virtual fence has, saved you? Some of it you can pencil out, but this last one of time savings, I'm like, what's your time worth? Like how do you put, when you really start doing intensive grazing on a system, how do you value your time? Hours and hours of not putting up polywire or, doing daily moves or things like that. So, time savings is sometimes maybe a benefit also of virtual fence that people may or may not think of. But that's kind of how we started with the virtual fence. I took this picture of a halter collar from their website. And so why halter? Like I said, I mentioned we started with our first partnership, and it might work for some people. It just wasn't working for us. So when we saw the design of a halter collar where everything sits kind of around their neck and the top with solar panels and different things, we were immediately attracted to that because of kind of the failures we had run into previously. So this kind of, I don't know if people are familiar with what a halter collar looks like, but this just kind of shows their design. A big benefit that drove us to halter too was the solar panels. So they are a pretty much self-sufficient in terms of power, based with solar panels. That was another issue that we had run into, was that a battery that was supposed to last a year, and we had some, burning out in like 2 months. So that was another big draw for us with the solar panels on top. They do have another piece that kind of on one of the pictures coming up, you can kind of see a weight that keeps the collar on top so that those solar panels are always charging and always on top. The other thing that was very attractive to us to go with halter is it uses a series of cues to actually guide an animal. It's not just a here's your hard line, do not cross it, or else you get your little shock, do not cross this line. If an animal wanders out of that virtual fence line, it actually has cues to bring her back. So you can see it has a little arrow there. It does have a right and a left side to the collar. So that, yep, that little arrow right there, that faces forward so that there's a right ear and a left ear. And so if it wants this animal to go to the left, it'll beep in her right ear to actually turn her, or vice versa. If it wants to go right, it'll beep in her left. It also uses positive reinforcement cues. So like if you're doing a shift and wanting them to go to their new grass, it gives small little vibrations that the cattle learn, oh, that means something's good. I will move forward. So that was really great because with our old system, if they kind of got out of their borders, we'd kind of have to go put them in and then hope everybody held because, even though collars are good, the herd mentality is still very strong. So once we would lose too many collars, we couldn't even contain the ones that we had because they were just like, well, Betty and Mary are over there. I don't care. I'm going to go, with them. So the actual process that the collar can bring an animal back is amazing. The other kind of cool thing is with all the AI technology that they have going on in their collar and the data going to the tower and back to the collar, not every cow gets the same cues. It learns how a cow responds. Like if she does wander out, it will start with that same series that got her back the last time. And then if it doesn't work, then it'll say, okay, I'm going to try this. And they do have a safety feature on it that if a cow gets, after so many, I don't know if it's minutes or feet from a boundary, they're just going to say, okay, we're going to let you be for a little bit. It'll kind of automatically pause itself and then it will try to come again. That way a cow's not, just getting all these cues over and over and over, kind of a safety animal husbandry thing. So it is kind of amazing. It's almost like a new animal handling device because of all the different signals that it can do. So you can see it has like a little weighted piece that goes underneath the neck there. I think it weighs like 2.5 kilograms, which would be like close to what, 4.5, 5 pounds, something like that. So very easy. They're easy to put on, and I think in terms of our other collars, they look way more comfortable. We haven't had any issues with, jaw bruises like the other ones flopping around. And they sit like her collar looks tight, but it's not. It just they fit so well. But you can see kind of it's a two-piece with a weight, and then I guess the other equipment you have with the collar would be a tower. And depending on the size of the ranch and your contour and different things, it depends on how many towers you need to kind of talk to the collars, but they would walk you through that. So that's kind of a real brief rundown on how they work, what they look like, things like that. The other cool thing about Halter is it's all app-based, which that might drive somebody crazy, but I like it because we didn't have an app. It was all PC based or like through the web, and it was a little hard to do things on the fly when you were there. But the one on the left just shows that was a break I had kind of doing more intensive grazing. I think I'd fed them hay that day because they're all in a line. But I was just gonna like creep them forward to a new break. We had figured out with our grass growth and like that supplementing with hay that they needed, I think it was like 2 new acres a day for the number of head that we had. We wouldn't have had, the quality of forage was sufficient. We were feeding hay mainly to extend our grazing days. These were fall pears out on a fescue mix of clover and different things. And we like to extend those days because that's the best place, health-wise, quality-wise, that those cattle can be right then through the winter with a fall calf. So that kind of shows you the white line is a virtual kind of where they were contained. That gray or the tan beige color was where we've already grazed. So you can see where we've been and where we were kind of rotating. We have waters all in the middle. So you can see it was kind of a little bit of a pie pyramid thing as we go. I had a weird little L. I was letting them go back for something. Maybe I'd fed hay and they were cleaning it up. I'm not sure. So that kind of shows a little bit of that in an intense grazing. The one on the right, I took a screenshot. This is us currently as of yesterday. I had some cows behind my house. I was that little blue dot. I had 70 spring pears kind of on a little patch. Way north, we have 2 different fall cows now starting to calve. They're in 2 different pastures, but we're starting to experiment with collars and calving. And so we just had 4 calves yesterday. And so it's just getting started in terms of how we will really utilize it. But you can see all the little dots, those cows, and how we're hoping to use the collars during a calving situation will be as they calve, we pause their collar, meaning she's free to do whatever she wants, go wherever she wants, just to make sure we don't, mess something up that initial part. You can choose, so they call them mobs because they're in a New Zealand-based company. So a herd is a mob. And right now, what we're going to do is as they calve, there's different colors that you can choose for each mob. And as she calves, we're going to change her over to a different color and a different mob so that even from a wide view, we can say, oh, she's way off, but she's already calved. I don't have to go over and check her. Um, this, the one that has one of these is a full section. And so just not having to go the entire section every day, making sure like, oh, there's one way over there. And then you get over there and she's already had a calf. So some of those things we're going to, I think, have a benefit of with a collar that, you don't think about with virtual fence. We're just getting on the tip of the iceberg with that. So to be continued on seeing how it works for us. I know Matthew mentioned something earlier about, excluding places. That is unfortunately the one thing that Halter currently cannot do. They are so focused on, okay, we're going to contain an animal here. We cannot exclude within a virtual fence break. So how we handled the research with that, you can see all those red triangles. That was bird zones this summer that we would have to just draw breaks. We could set up breaks and still keep them out of those. It just couldn't be like, having that bird zone square in the middle of our break. So it was workable, how you drew a break and how you shifted, but that is unfortunately we've it might be coming in the future because one thing that we've been really pushing them on, but that's unfortunately you cannot exclude within a break. You can draw all sorts of, you can get very creative with your breaks around things, but you can't actually exclude from the middle of a break. So that kind of shows the app and the different boundaries. Let's see. Okay. Has there been using the collars? The training process. Intensive grazing versus native. So we first started with halter in November and we put them on our fall pairs. And in that situation, how we did a training was we put up a poly wire fence 10 feet off of their virtual line. So to start out, they had a visual of the fence while they were learning, what the cues of the collar went. So that was day one. Day two, we went to 20 feet. And even I would say that first day, even with 10 feet, you could see a solid line that collar had kept them. They hadn't even gotten close to our poly wire. So we used just the poly wire as a visual cue as they learned, but it was very, very fast. So we just kept moving the poly wire. I think we did 4 different days. And by like the end of the day, like the last one, we were 60 feet out. And it's like, they're done. Like they knew how to do it. In terms of native, our native, they've had big enough breaks that the training is just as you go. I should have included a video of one, the first time, some of the cows interacted because it was instant. Like there was hardly we didn't have to do anything. They learned really fast. And so on the native side, they said as long as you allowed them 10 acres, which on native, holy cow, that's nothing. Like 10 acres, giving them 10 acres is, you can make it really big. But we just started that way on native and they picked it right up this spring. We collared some new ones this spring. Cows are very smart. They have picked this up from day one. And we have learned that some things, when we had the app, they had to physically draw our borders of where they thought, a physical fence was. And one day I looked and all of a sudden I had like this little narrow band of cows just like leaving their break. And I'm like, what is going on? So I went down and our physical fence didn't match up with where they thought the physical fence was. So we had an invisible gate open pretty much that they had found um to their new place. So they basically found like, oh, there's nothing here. And like their callers weren't telling them anything because the callers thought there was a physical fence there, so it wasn't cueing them. And so we laughed. We're like, well, they found an invisible gate to our invisible fence. Like, but they have learned very, very fast and taken these. As I mentioned before, this is basically just a new animal handling tool. It's very quiet. There's nothing about them that I would say is invasive to the cow or anybody. I know some people have asked, like, in terms of how you handle these cows, has it changed? No, I mean, we have very docile, laid back cows to begin with, but I mean, it doesn't deter them from doing anything they normally do. It's just, it's a new way to kind of, you can move them sometimes without even being there. Um, a different way that we've used the collars that may not be thought of for different people in virtual fence is when we do our spring AI breeding season, most of the time we're coming off of pasture. So how we used the collars this year for spring was with AI, you have a schedule. Okay, once those seeders go in, they get pulled a week later in the evening. If you're doing a 7-day, you kind of know where cows need to be at what time. So we use the breaks to kind of gradually move everybody up to the gate. So if we needed them 5 o'clock on Thursday evening, those cows were right by the gate. All we had to do was, drop that break or pause their collars so we could go in, work them, and then take them right back. We didn't have to be like, oh, we have no idea where everybody's going to be. What time should we start gathering? Like everybody was there. It was a slow, gradual, move. And so it was a way to almost stage everybody where we needed to be, which was a benefit that I don't think we thought about that until we had the collars and started using them. I put calves on there right now, like stocker sized, and calves do not get collars. So when we have pairs with collars, the calves obviously are free. So we won't probably ever get rid of our physical fences in terms of a actual boundary because with pairs you can't contain them. But one benefit, especially when we were down this fall with the fall pairs on the fescue, those calves learned immediately where the better grass was. They were constantly grazing ahead of the cows. So it was almost like a built-in creep feeder because those calves could go and they could go pick, whatever they wanted to eat, go lay in fresh grass, um, you know, do whatever they needed to do. And then they'd come back for mom when they needed her and whatever. It was very, very interesting to see as they grew how far, like those are 40-acre paddocks that we have down there. But by the end of it, sometimes I go out there and the calves would be on the complete opposite side, eating whatever they wanted. And I think our weaning weights were definitely higher this year because they were just creeping ahead. So that was one factor we didn't even think about. This spring, it took the spring calves, so we collared before AI. It took them a little longer to figure out, oh, hey, like I can, we didn't use quite as intensive grazing on the native, but I don't know if it was age a little bit with those calves. It took them longer. And I think that was mainly what it is, the age, they got braver. But just here in the last probably 2 to 3 weeks, we've noticed the calves finally, they're creeping ahead and kind of doing some different things. So that was a little bit different with the collars as well. And then one thing I will say is like with using the collars, your limiting factor will always be water, not your creativity. Like you can have all these great ideas, but if you don't have water somewhere, that's always a limiting factor. And I know different people have different resources, maybe to cheaply get new waters, as they get callers and say, "Oh, I can utilize this. I can justify water." On some of our native, we don't have the water. So that's one thing we're looking at different things is like, oh, we grazed a river bottom of Gamma early spring and then here again here late. And we had to like leave a gate open into the native to go to the pond, which it worked. We figured out how to do breaks to keep them from totally, but going back and forth on that native, we kind of made a path to that pond to that Gamma. And so we're like, oh, we got to figure out how to get water. We got to figure out how to get water out there so that we don't have to do that. But yeah, the sky, if you've got water resources or like that can trench water or do water, like the sky will be the limit with collars for sure. But that for us has been the biggest thing is we're limited a little bit by water. This was a drone shot I thought was interesting to show you. So this was an intense grazing, not necessarily, obviously, I know we're talking about more native, but I thought it was still interesting. You can see a hard line there where they, were held and grazed. And then the other thing I thought was interesting is look at the manure piles. Like that, that to me was also another kind of interesting thing when you intense graze, some of that benefit. But that shows this fall kind of a little bit of intensive grazing from above. Just taking a picture there. And then I have one more. So this is a video of a move on native to kind of show you possibly what it looks like if it works. So you can see the first couple cows, they're guided, and then they slowly, some are going to the other side, but they've found it in those first two ones, and then there everybody, you can kind of see everybody like, oh, we can go. But it's real anticlimactic most of the time. But just kind of a move we could capture there. And I would say like moves can be as fast or slow as somebody wants them to be. We're not too concerned about finding on the native like when we gave it to them. I know some people in intense systems might want moves faster. But they're pretty smart in terms of figuring it all out. That's a quick thing of how we've used them and what we've learned.
That was awesome and perfect. Okay, so we're at the end of our webinar and we are ready for questions. The first question is from Kelsey. It says, if you don't have a grazing plan or EQIP contract yet, do you need a certified grazing plan to qualify for the virtual fence practice?
I was thinking about this while Christine was talking. I don't know the exact details when it comes to this. This is when I would recommend going in and talking to your local county extension agent. I know you will eventually, if you get selected for the program, need a grazing plan of some sort. I don't know if it technically needs to be like a certified grazing plan. I know NRCS will work with you on all of those fronts to get everything ready to be able to be submitted by October 3rd. So that's something I would recommend reaching out to your local offices about. And I can also, if you want to reach out to me at a later date, I can get a hold of my contacts and try and get you more information, Kelsey.
Yep. So go to your offices. It'll be great. And then we have another question. It says, do you have any problems with your calves creep grazing ahead, causing your cows to choose to leave the boundaries?
With halter, we actually have not had that be a problem. I think the good thing is even if, like I said, the cow wanders out, she will come back. And so I think even if there is a time that one or two are out, like there's enough contained that they really don't pay attention. In terms of the calves, it seems like it was kind of funny, but I think they couldn't go that far to where those cows, on that 40-acre paddock, we didn't really have an issue with those calves going out in front of them to cause an issue of them not staying in.
Awesome. And then do the cattle respond well to the drone, or do they tend to run when they see and hear it?
Oh, when we did that picture, it depends how high we are. Like that one was pretty high, and most of the time they won't even know it's there. We were able to capture some different moves too, but I do know like sometimes if you get too close, they kind of like what's going on. But for the most part, we stay high like that when we were trying to look for, photos like that it doesn't seem to really affect them.
I have a question for you, Christine. So,
Yeah.
you've worked with a couple different companies. So, what advice would you have for a producer looking to get into this technology? Like, what things should they be thinking about whenever they're trying to decide which one is right for them?
Yeah. I think it will come down to exactly, you know, um, how you want to utilize them. I know like eShepherd and some different companies are all great. And like I said, what it came down to for us, where we have a lot of different contours, we have the flat bottom that has our intensive grazing, but now that we're on the native, we've got ups and downs and different things is, see what company fits your topography the best. If you're in an arid climate or wet and humid, Missouri's probably more like, eastern Kansas for us where we're at. See if that, moisture, anything like that will be an issue. I guess my other suggestion would be in terms of like that, in terms of if you like things on your app, if it's easy and accessible, because I mean, like when we didn't have access, like in the, like on the, not on the fly, but like right out there, it was very, very hard to access some of the things we needed. And where if they're app based or not app based, it really does make a difference because I've loved having it on you with you because collars fall off, and so it's been, they do, we've had a pretty good retention with the halter collars, but being able to have it whether you're out in the pasture or at home or wherever has been really, really good. And then my other thing is just kind of you'll know fits of personalities of people behind the companies and the different support options they have. That's been the other great thing about Halter is they've got a chat helpline, or if you need a call, they've been really, really good from that standpoint in terms of being able to help people through things. I know they've grown immensely since we even started in November. So they're going through a little bit of growing pains on some different things, trying to figure out how to do stuff in the US. Like I said, because they're a halter or a New Zealand-based company. But I think I would leave it up to each producer knowing, okay, what are your ultimate goals? Are you going to be more intensive grazing, big grazing, or both? If you need both, then I definitely look at a system that can do, because if they can do the intensive grazing, you'll be fine on a native or bigger part. So for sure. So look
Yeah.
at what your needs are in terms of how you're going to utilize it, and then see which one fits the best in terms of their tools, options, and the gear, I guess.
Mhm. I think that's some really great advice. And then we have another question. So, have you tested to see how accurate your virtual fence is on your computer screen compared to where the boundary is on land? Or what is the accuracy of the virtual fence? Is there a buffer that it is good to?
So when we did the training, in terms of, we had to set the poly wire off 10 feet and stuff. Um, you have like I said, I told you I had that little blue dot was where I was at. You know where you are at in terms of that boundary because the GPS of your location, and it is pretty accurate. I'm not gonna say that it's like within 3 feet, but within fairly accurate. What would they? I'm trying to remember when we first started, especially for New Zealand, like in terms of the collar is always 100% on with GPS. So that line to that collar is spot on. Now, when I go out with my little blue dot, can I be a little bit off one way or another? Yes, but that collar is exactly on. And I think they were saying it can be within like 3 feet. Like it's going to be very, very precise. Because they're used to, with dairies in New Zealand, it has to be straight on. One thing that has been a little bit more of a challenge is, when you draw that line, when they set up our ranch, they had to use basically, like Google Maps and different things to see where all the boundaries are. We have had a little issue of those external boundaries being off a bit. Like I said, in terms of my imaginary gate was open because where we thought a physical boundary wasn't actually there. That was not necessarily a collar location or a virtual fence location. It was more of a software issue in terms of how they had to lay them on, because they can't use like KML files or like, kind of those exact ones. So they were really having to use like Google Maps and manually set up at first. But otherwise, in terms of like where your line is and they can graze up to, as long as it's not like that on a barrier fence, because they don't get any signals if it's against a physical fence, it's pretty accurate.
And then could we address a ballpark cost for this kind of system?
With Halter, at least, they always dodge this question because it's going to come down to how many towers you need. I mean, I think the collars are somewhere, I can't remember what they said. The collars are like $30 a year or something, but it really depends on how big an area you're covering and how many towers you're going to need. So
I would say that question's very dependent depending on what company you go with. If you go with a cellular version of a collar or a tower-based system, all of those different kinds of things can all kind of play a factor into it. Yeah, each company is different is kind of the easiest way I can explain it. I mean, some of those collars, if you're going to do the system where you outright buy the collar, the cost for those collars can range anywhere from $200 all the way up to like $350 a collar. If you're looking at a system where you're not paying up front for the collars, but an annual fee, you can look in a ballpark range of anywhere from $40 all the way up to $96 a head. Just kind of, again, company dependent. But um, if you want to reach out to me separately, Linda, I have some other figures and different things I can share with you to kind of help you get some more information on that point. And that goes for everybody on that cost side. That's what I'm here for, to kind of help you work through those numbers and look at those things. But yeah.
We do have one more question. It says, having used the system for a few years now, do you find yourself building a fence or do you just use the virtual fence?
did they ask if we built new fence?
Yeah, if you've been building any like new hard fence.
No, we've been mainly, like I said, since November is really the only time we've had confidence in collars. I mean, to really be able to use them like they have been. But we haven't built any new fence. We haven't really taken out fence just because, like I said, we have calves. Most of these run on pairs at times. One thing that has been good, so we're getting ready to rebuild our feed yard, and they are way behind where we thought we were. One thing that we've been able to do, since we do have collars that we have confidence in, one side of that pasture, we haven't put pairs there, but one side of that pasture doesn't have any fence anymore because we had to take it out with part of the feed yard, and we've still been able to utilize it through the summer because we had the collars. Otherwise, it would have been like, we would have lost that pasture the whole entire summer because we haven't got it built back yet like we were supposed to. So that's probably the only case, I guess, where something came out. Not really, I mean, it's going to go back, but we haven't put anything new. I guess on the flip side is sometimes if we know there are dodgy fences, we've kept the virtual line off of a fence line just as an extra precaution. And then in early June, we had like a 6-inch rain in like 2 hours. And I told Daniel, I said, you better go pull those cows away from that water gap. So that was another time it was like we could kind of be like, okay, we're just going to move this fence and keep you away from that till we could go get it checked and things like that. So haven't really taken anything out or put anything new, but we have been able to use it in some different situations where we've either wanted to keep them off or keep them in a different area.
So we talked about the cow's learning curve, Christine, but just for producer knowledge, you as a
Ah,
producer, what do you think your biggest learning curve with the technology is?
um, I think for us, it was just learning how the system was and making sure that what we had set up was what it was going to be. You know, there was a lot of like, at least for us, and initially going with Halter, we didn't know if it was going to work because we'd kind of failed. But I think for us, again, it was just like all of a sudden, like we were limiting ourselves with traditional thinking of, you know, like this is how we've done it. This is where they go because this is where the fence is. And so I think for us, the biggest learning curve has been to expand our thinking of how this can work. Oh, we can use it in these different situations, you know, like these untraditional ones, or like that. Keep them off of the water gap until we can get it fixed. So I think for us was just kind of revamping our mind as long as water was there, like of, oh, this is a possibility now because, you know, we have this option. So I think that's been the biggest learning curve is just not being stuck in, okay, we've had to do this because that's what we've done, is just like rethinking, kind of recreating the wheel now that you have this new tool.
That's awesome. No, I think that's great advice. Thanks, Christine.
Yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate it. Glad to be
And
here.
then we have one more question, and this will
Okay.
be the last question. Do these work well through heavy brush and timber?
So far, we have been able to maintain quite a few collars through timber. One of the park um, pastures has a really gnarly ditch, and we were a little worried to see how we would come through. And I think we had to replace like maybe three, and one wasn't falling off. It just kind of, I don't know, just stopped working. Um, so far so good. I mean that's our biggest test was um that ditch. And sometimes we didn't let them always have it, but so far through things we've been able to do it. And they do that strap, that bottom strap that has the weight right now is nylon. So it's a little bit of a safety so that if they did get caught, which I had a collar, I was like, I think that fell off. She had actually caught it on a post. It was out in the park. She had caught it on the post. I don't even know how she hooked it because like I could barely get it off. But where the buckle was, she was able to pull, but it tore through that nylon as a safety and she was able to get out. But otherwise, other than that one, one where I was like, oh, thank goodness, like that would have been bad. We haven't really lost any or had much issue with brush and timber, but I don't know how woolly of areas some people's have. But that ditch was a good test for us this summer, and it seemed to be okay. So
Awesome. So again, thank you guys so much for coming. You can join us on September 26th to learn a little bit more about nutrient management. One last thing, if you scan that QR code or click on the link in the chat, please take our surveys. We do read them. We do listen to your feedback, and it does give us future ideas for different things. That's how we got Christine here today, because you said you wanted to hear from a real life producer. So we do listen and we do look at them. So please fill them out. All right. Thank you guys so much for joining, and we'll get you next time.
thank you.